Perfect. I love it. Thank
Okay,
you.
excellent. It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
Oh, good to meet you too, Joe.
So, before we get into your good work, I want to know this. 5 years ago, this pandemic was raging, changing so many things in our lives. How did you get through it, and how has it radiated into your life in 2025?
Oh my gosh, in a huge way, in an absolutely huge way. I'm married to my third and best and last husband.
Excellent.
And it's really funny because we had known each other just kind of socially through different, I mean, Pasadena, I like to joke, is kind of a little big town, right? And we both grew up here, but just enough difference in age that school wouldn't necessarily overlap, and also just enough difference in kind of how we grew up that we wouldn't have really overlapped. But then later in life, we had these several different points of connection. And so I think we originally met like in 2017 at an event, and we talked a little bit, and then we would run into each other at another event, and then at one point he reached out to me and said he wrote a very sweet email. He said, Kristen, I have met you now. We're just, we're only email. We haven't and this was the very first time he had emailed, and he said, I've met you now a couple of times and I'm completely captivated. Would I mean like good vocabulary word, right?
Yeah.
And he said, would you care to do something, go out kind of thing. And I was in the process of just I had my second marriage. It was really, I mean, I don't think there's any marriage that's simple to get out of. And I admire people who are able to do that because I know there are some people, I guess, who are able to do that. But I, I mean, really, after my second marriage, I was just like, I am never, ever, ever, like, I'm so not interested in this part of my life. I have a really full, wonderful life. I don't mind being alone, all these things. And so I was like, yeah, not, but it wasn't like a no. It was just, I said, not yet,
Yeah.
not now, not now.
Yeah.
And so it was funny. So, fast forward, we kind of kept running into each other, and we'd talk, we'd meet at these things and we'd chat the whole time. And so I it was like March, beginning of March. I'm walking down the street and I'm checking my phone because I have a client that I'm thinking is going to email me. And it's Phil, my husband, who emails me, and he says, hey, I find myself with some free time this weekend. Do you want to do something? And I'm like, okay, this could be okay. Like I'm thinking like, I'm walking past a million Starbuckses and everything. I'm like, oh, we'll get coffee or whatever.
Yeah.
So I said yes, and he's like, great. And so he says, I have tickets to this opera. I'll pick you up for dinner beforehand, and see you at 5 or whatever. And I'm
Yeah.
just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, does this guy do anything? Just like, because we actually had one date that I had canceled because again, it was kind of this big event and kind of all this. So at this point, early March, yeah, this was like March, we were going to go out March 6th or 7th, 2020.
Yeah.
And he, so I just kind of surrendered. I'm like, okay, in for a penny, in for a pound. He picks me up, and it's a couple of things that happened during the pandemic. I had allowed a woman to rent a room in my home because and she had started renting back in January. I mean, it was a complicated reason, but I was like, oh, I don't want to be I was so happy living by myself. I was kind of delirious every morning. I'd wake up and I was like, this is so great. And then, my mom comes to me and says, oh, I know this really nice woman, and she'll just, she's getting a teaching certificate. She'll barely be around. What do you think? And I thought, well, I don't want to be that. that person that lives by themselves that's so persnickety, right? That I don't have room for anyone else, and plus I always am saying no to my mom. So I'm like, okay, I want to say yes. Oof. So anyways, I have this woman who doesn't just, she's not busy in her room. She just kind of, spreads throughout the house. And so Phil picks me up and I'm like, this is so and so, and then my crazy dog, this is my crazy dog. And so we go off, we have a great time, and he drops me off and afterwards and says, well, what do you think about going out again? And I immediately said, I was like, yeah. And then I caught myself. I said, well, do you want to? And he said, yes. So I said, well, that'll be great, but I'm leaving tomorrow for like 10 days to go to the East Coast because my dad's having open heart surgery. And so we said our goodbyes, and then I went to the East Coast. In the meanwhile, my daughter is sent home from her first year of college, and she's thinking she's just coming home for kind of an extended spring break. There's this woman who's odd, who's living in the house, and I go to the East Coast. My dad has open heart surgery. Thankfully, everything is great. He is, his surgeon said, "You're my favorite kind of candidate for this because you will die from something else."
Yeah.
We've done this completely successfully. And I mean, at one point during that time, there was talk about closing the airports,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And I mean, at this point, I knew that my dad was okay, and I'm thinking to myself, gosh, I can't be stuck in North Carolina kind of indeterminately.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking I may have to, because my dad has a long-term partner that he's with, and she's very capable. So it wasn't like I was just leaving him alone. But but I just thought I could not. I mean, I'm glad that I was here for the portion I was here, but I also cannot be here for just forever.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about renting a car and all that. And so finally I get home, and it's at this point, Los Angeles is completely
Mhm.
shut down. It is, and I had talked to Phil at one point during that time. I think it was when I thought the airports were going to get shut down because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't be here forever. And I got home, and I think the day after I called him and I said, oh, because we actually we're now using the telephone. We're not emailing.
Yeah.
And I had said to him, I said, I'm home. And he said, well, great. When can I see you? And I said, well, you realize I've been in the hospital. I've been in 3 airports. I've been on 2 airplanes. Yeah, 2 airplanes, I guess. I have been in every grocery store in North Carolina. I also, for my dad's aftercare, had to go to every pharmacy. I mean, I'm probably a walking germ. And he's like, well, how about tomorrow night? And I thought, and it was, and so, a couple nights later, we made a plan to do something. And at that point, it was like, well, do you want to come to my house or do you want to go to your house? Because we can't go anywhere else.
Sure.
And from there, we had our pod, and we would go. I mean, our courtship was these, kind of 5 or 6 mile walks and talking, and then making dinner. And at this point, my daughter was home. Um, at my Ultimately, my mom joined the pod, and one of my other sons, and so it was kind of this lovely, sweet time where we did puzzles and just hung out. And I mean, I also was working at the same time with, I at that point was coaching, and thankfully, all of my clients survived and if not thrived during the business because we really found ways to pivot. Um, but it was this really unusual time that for us, we were tremendously, grateful and blessed not to have been impacted in a negative way. And not to say that we definitely lost people along the way. A dear friend of my mom's passed away, and but it was, yeah, it has a very sweet glow to it in
Yeah,
my mind. And it
absolutely.
and the thing that carries forward is we subsequently, Phil and I got married on January 21st, and we it was still kind of a COVID wedding. We had 40 people, everyone had to be spaced. We had masks on, it was outdoors. We offered COVID tests to everybody that we had purchased because at that point they were really, it was kind of difficult to get them, and you still had to go someplace to do it. So we had found a clinic that was willing to do that. And which was kind of nice though. I mean, and we had a really interesting group of attendees because we basically had people that we had ultimately done stuff with
Yeah.
during our COVID courtship. Uh and so of course our marriage carries forth as something. But for me professionally, I came out of COVID and it really took me a while. It was probably a full year after that I realized how I was completely burned out in terms of doing business coaching. And I had to do something else because and I mean, what else was I going to do? I mean, I love my clients. And so I just kind of overgave during COVID, um, it is what it is. And I really needed to pivot after that. And I'm happy to say that I love what I'm doing now in ways that it really feels, I feel like so much of my previous professional journey was at an early age was kind of really about the hustle. It had very little to do with the thing that I was doing. It was just, let me stay busy and let me make a little money, right? And and then it morphed into something where basically people saw skills that I had and asked me to provide a service or fill in a role. And they weren't necessarily skills that I I was thinking, oh gosh, this is the thing that I want to take out into the world and, hang my shingle on. So I feel like I kind of fell into certain professions, and I can really say what I do now in terms of leading workshops and facilitating small groups is the thing that I absolutely love doing more than yeah, I find it's so meaningful to me.
What did you want to be when you were a kid? What was your dream job?
That is, that's one of the things I used to ask my clients, right? And I usually would go for, do you have a certain age? I would usually ask people like at fifth grade, what did you
Right.
want to be at fifth grade?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you have enough knowledge, but you haven't quite been, completely, schooled,
Yeah.
right? So in fifth grade, it's funny, I remember we had to do a project, and you had to write about what you would want to do. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to have this place where I could care for people, particularly children and animals. And just would I would have this place where they would be okay.
Yeah. That's wonderful. So Talk to me a little bit about role models or inspirations that have allowed you to evolve to this point where you found your voice and your career path.
Yeah, that is, I've been thinking about that one because my parents were, and they're both still alive, and they both are, living their best lives independently from each other. They divorced when I was about 4 or 5. I guess they split up when I was 4. Who knows when the divorce was actually final. And I'm an only child. And I, my parents were really probably not prepared to have a child. And so the parenting was a little loosey-goosey. And as a result, in some ways, you know, I would be the parent in many situations growing up. And so I had to kind of look outside of my family system for role models. I grew up, I was very close to my grandparents, and they had my mom's mom on her side, and then my grandma Connie and my granddad on my dad's side. And they were very important and influential in my life. I don't know. It's funny because I don't know if I necessarily feel like they are role models. I mean, I feel like they gave me a little bit of structure, which I was craving as a kid. I mean, I think we all, we crave that structure a bit. I think it was, you know, I really was able at a very young age. I liked going to school. School was pretty easy for me. Not necessarily socially with my peers, but because I was usually like with my grandparents and also with my parents, I was oftentimes the only child in the room of adults. So I got along with my teachers really well. And so a lot of times my teachers I became very close to them. I recently was leading a workshop, and the prompt was a friendship that changed me was. And in that moment of this workshop, I thought, gosh, a friendship that changed me was my French teacher from 7th grade. She was pretty much my French teacher from 7th to 12th grade. And just quintessential Parisian French woman, tiny, tiny, wore little tweed suits and, little short bob, smoked like a chimney. Those were the days where you'd knock on the door at the teacher's lounge, and the door would open and this like wall of cigarette smoke would hit you. And for whatever reason, I was not really that good at French. I mean, I still do Duolingo, and I am shocked at how horrible my accent is. But um, I just, for some reason, she and I really got along, and by extension, the whole group of other language teachers, because they all kind of sat in an open office, and I knew that she liked going out to lunch. And there was one restaurant in particular I knew she liked. So as soon as we could, I suggested to her, I said, wouldn't it be great if we did a field trip and we went out to lunch and as a class? And she's like, I think we could do that. So we figured out how to make that happen. And then you couldn't leave every week, but I was like, gosh, isn't it fun to kind of have class be a little bit different? And she's like, yeah, it's fun. And so then I started organizing these like weekly parties, these French parties that we would have, and we would generally have them in the language office and then the other language teachers. And I think there was something in her, she was still strict, and she still was my teacher, and she still had no qualms about giving me a a deservedly horrible grade, which didn't bother me either. But there was something so nice about being able to do something different
Yeah,
together in her support of that.
yeah. So let me ask you this. What has been one of the best client experiences that you've had so far? What has been the
Mm.
best feedback? One that's made you grow? Maybe it was difficult or just memorable that has been really on your radar.
Well, I definitely can think of a couple that made me grow. So I do remember specifically when I was doing landscape design and I had been referred to a family uh and I was at this point, my landscape design career is one of those ones where, kind of people came to me and said, "Gosh, I really love what you're doing in your own space. Would you do it for me?" And that's kind of how it morphed into an actual business. So at this point, I was partnered with a landscape contractor who was doing the installation. We had a small crew, and I would primarily do the design work. I'd also kind of project manage and do the procurement in terms of getting the materials. And I was really the kind of the client, I was interfacing with the clients a lot. And so there was a job that was referred to as not a big job. And it was through a realtor, a local realtor, and this is a woman that I really liked, and I still run into her, and really she's lovely. Uh, and we had worked at her personal home, so this was going to be one of her clients, and this was a family who was getting their house ready to. They were going to lease it while they moved, and I remember meeting the woman, the she had three children, and the husband had already gone up north in the Central Valley area, and that was where he had gone to school. He'd absolutely, that was he was so happy to be moving back there. His wife, on the other hand, not so much. And she had I can't remember the age range, but kind of maybe like a preteen to they were all school age children, but and at that point I had three children, and I I really I saw so much of myself in her, um and which was not necessarily a good thing in terms of how it related to this job. And my heart just went out to her because I had been in a situation with the kid's dad where there was a lot of contentious conversations around relocating and also being the primary caregiver and feeling like I wasn't necessarily in a real parenting partnership. And and Oh God, it was like I so wanted to make at least one thing easier for her. And if anything and everything could go wrong, anything and everything did go wrong. Because it's one thing to, and it got to the point where this was a point where I thought I'm not sure that I want to do this career anymore. I'm not sure I want to do landscape anymore because the authorities ended up getting called, and I mean it was basically every we did a great job. We cleaned everything up. Things were kind of in disrepair. It was a really sad situation. We made everything look great. Um, but there were all those little red flags along the way. And then we were being accused of breaking, certain things. We were accused of disrupting the cable service that we had somehow we're and then um and then she just didn't want to pay. And and so ultimately I was like, well, some of the stuff we've agreed to loan you as staging items and some things, so I will be, you know, I will be removing these things since you don't want to pay for them. And this is when I'm coming. And so that's what I did. And that's when she got the authorities involved because she felt like I had trespassed on her space. And and I, agreed to meet with the person and everything. And I took full responsibility. I told my crew and my partner, I said, you go home. I mean, I made this choice alone. And it resolved itself. Basically, the authorities kind of saw her for what she was, which was just a really angry, sad person, and who was looking for anyone to take her anger out of, except for she couldn't talk to her husband about how angry she was, right? And I mean, she wrote me like a 10-page certified, registered letter that was all like specifically directed at how I had ruined kind of her life. And so I think for me, in terms of a client of, being in any kind of place where you are interacting with clients, it's it I have to be careful because yes, I can see where clients need help, and I need to make sure that they want my help, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you ever been in an experience like
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. No, I get it. I totally get what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I mean, and then conversely, I later on pivoted towards business coaching, and specifically it was because I had been started becoming more active in my local chapter of the professional organization that supports landscape designers, and and realized I had all these colleagues who were so amazing at what they did. I mean, just like incredibly talented people, and who were really struggling in terms of how to run their business, and really their business processes and systems were inhibiting them from being as successful as they wanted to be and as they could be. So I pivoted towards that, and I ended up working with all sorts of clients as it turns out. But one of my absolute best business coaching clients is a woman that I'm still in contact with, and she's become a dear friend. And we've she was on the other we met through different conferences, and then when she hired me, and she is so remarkable in that she's very coachable. She really has an open mind and wants to learn. And not to say that we didn't have some back and forth about, different ideas, but I think that there was just a real sense of uh, we we partnered so well because, and I worked with her for, gosh, almost 6 or 7 years, and really kind of saw at the point where she hired me, she wanted to expand her business and kind of offer more services. So we did that, and then she figured out, that doesn't really work for me. So then we kind of right-sized things, and I worked with her during a really life-changing divorce from her husband of 30 years, and then having to figure out, gosh, okay, so my situation, there's some changes. And so from that point, we brainstormed around creating passive income to help supplement kind of retirement and looking forward, because her situation had changed. So I I mean, that was such a fun client for me because I feel like I was really, exercising all parts of my brain in the process of working with her, and also just seeing her really take the ideas that I was putting forth and just running with them and being able to see. And sometimes, I mean, there were some ideas that admittedly were, kind of theoretical, right? I hadn't actually run them before. And so, I feel like in some ways we were I think that's the thing, right? Is that a great client is in many ways a collaborator.
Yeah, for sure. So let me ask you this. Speaking of clients, if anyone wants to hire you, reach out, they have questions, any of the good business, where do they go?
I have a website, kristanswan.com, and my focus primarily now is in workshops and small group leadership. So I've been working most recently this year in January. I launched Discovering Your Spiritual Autobiography, and that is an in-person small group. It can be both an 8-week version, which is really meant to be a community building activity. And also, there are shorter 1-day intensives, and then weekend retreats that also have similar content. And that is specifically a non-denominational exploration of your stories and also kind of as it relates to that which is bigger than yourself.
Wonderful. I'm going to put all of this in the show notes. What a great story. Thank you so much. I mean, from the pandemic and all the great work you're doing, thank you for your time today. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you
Take
for
care.
listening.
Absolutely.
Looking to get new clients to your business through cold calling or email marketing? At Agency Y, they envision a world in which small and big companies have equal chances to win new customers in the market. Their purpose is to bring parity and reduce the gap between large and small firms with the help of their cold calling and cold email marketing services. Use the code Joe Dimino 10 at www.agencyyy.org/coldcallingjoe.php or www.agencyyy.org/emailmarketingjoe.php to get 10% off your first order. This is Joe Dimino of Neon Jazz and Famous Interviews, and I stand behind Agency Y to meet your business dreams.